It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon when Emma, a hard-working mechanic, was enjoying her simple lunch at the Greasy Spoon diner she frequented on her lunch breaks. Her life was routine, no surprises, just the hum of engines and the occasional frustrated customer. She had never been one to expect much, and to be honest, she liked it that way. The world outside her tools and wrenches was a noisy place, full of people with their own problems, none of which had much to do with her. But everything changed when a man, disheveled and weary, approached her table. His name was Jack, just another face in a city full of them, or so she thought. He asked if he could sit with her, and without thinking, Emma offered him a seat. She wasn't used to sharing her lunch, but something in his eyes told her that, perhaps for once, she should open up. They talked, as strangers do, but there was something different about him, a quiet desperation that tugged at something inside her. Little did Emma know, Jack wasn't just a man down on his luck. He was searching for something, or rather, someone, her. This chance meeting wasn't an accident. It was the beginning of a twist that would change Emma's life forever, sending her on a journey to uncover the truth behind a secret film project, a hidden agenda, and a past she didn't even know was hers. A simple act of kindness, a stranger, and the surprising revelation that their paths were destined to cross. Emma's life would never be the same again. It was an ordinary Tuesday afternoon when Emma, a skilled mechanic, found herself sitting at the corner booth of a small diner, her greasy coveralls still warm from a long shift under the hood of a car. She had spent most of her life in this town, known by the locals for her steady hands and a no-nonsense attitude that matched the clink of wrenches and the hum of engines. The world outside her shop was a loud, chaotic place, and Emma preferred the quiet of her work. It was simple: fix the car, solve the problem, get paid. Life was easy when you didn't expect much from it. At 33, Emma had already seen more than her fair share of trouble, but she had learned to keep her head down and focus on the things that mattered: her work, her independence, and a simple peace she rarely found anywhere else. As she peeled off her gloves, her fingers still stained from oil, she reached for her sandwich, the Greasy Diner Daily Special. The quiet buzz of the diner, with the soft clink of dishes and low chatter, was the only background noise to the otherwise still world she'd carved out for herself. Emma didn't mind it. In fact, she thrived in this comfort, this predictable routine that kept everything in its place. But as she took the first bite of her sandwich, she noticed a man standing near her table, hesitating, as if unsure of how to approach. He wasn't a regular, that was clear enough. He was older than most of the people who passed through these doors, his clothes slightly worn but not entirely shabby, and his face, though lined with age, carried a tiredness that seemed far deeper than any of the diner's usual patrons. His eyes, dark and full of quiet contemplation, seemed to be searching for something somewhere. Emma had seen plenty of lost souls pass through this diner, all of them with stories and troubles that she wasn't interested in hearing. Yet, something about this man's presence piqued her curiosity. "Excuse me," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "Would you mind if I joined you?" Emma glanced up, surprised by the request. She wasn't one for socializing, especially with strangers. It wasn't that she minded company, but her lunch was always a sacred time, a brief respite from the mechanical world she inhabited. Still, there was something in his voice, an earnestness that made her hesitate, just for a moment. And in that moment, she did something she hadn't done in years. She invited him to sit. "Sure," she replied, nodding toward the empty seat across from her. The man sat down slowly, as if he weren't entirely sure he belonged there. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. The sounds of the diner continued around them, but Emma found herself aware of the quiet between them. She could sense his unease, and it reminded her of the days when she felt like an outsider herself, before she'd built her world within the confines of her garage and her tools. "Thanks," he said finally, his voice barely audible over the hum of the diner. "I wasn't sure where else to go. It's been a long day." Emma didn't respond immediately. Instead, she studied him. He had a quiet intensity about him, like someone who had spent too much time alone, too much time thinking. It was almost as if he didn't know where to begin, and the silence stretched between them once more. Emma wasn't a woman who easily opened up, but she could feel that there was something real in his presence. She didn't ask him what he was running from or why he had chosen her of all people to share a table with. Instead, she offered him a smile, the kind she gave customers when they finally stopped complaining about the price of a repair. "You look like you've had your share of troubles," she said, setting down her sandwich. The words felt awkward coming from her, but there was a truth in them that seemed to hang in the air. The man nodded, his shoulders slumping slightly. "More than I'd like to admit," he muttered. Then he sighed, glancing out the diner window as if seeking some kind of answer in the traffic outside. "I was hoping for a moment's peace, but I guess sometimes life has a way of throwing things at you when you least expect it." Emma raised an eyebrow but said nothing. She had learned long ago that everyone had a story, and most of those stories weren't worth hearing. But something about the weight in his voice made her hesitate again. Maybe it was the raw honesty in his tone, or perhaps it was the vulnerability in his eyes. Whatever it was enough to make her keep listening. "The man's name was Jack," he explained. "He was in town for reasons he couldn't quite put into words, but he wasn't sure where he was going next." There was something in his eyes that made Emma feel like he was holding back a bigger part of his story, something deeper than what he was letting on. But as they continued to talk, she felt herself drawn into his world, even if she didn't understand it. There was something magnetic about him, something familiar yet foreign. And when Jack finally asked her, almost casually, if she had ever felt like life had a way of throwing people together for reasons they couldn't explain, Emma felt the strange stirrings of a connection she couldn't quite place. But as they parted ways, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that this meeting, this lunch, this moment of connection wasn't as random as it seemed. As Emma finished her lunch, she couldn't help but feel a quiet stirring in her chest. She had spent years avoiding emotional entanglements, burying herself in her work as a way to keep the world at arm's length. The mechanics of cars made more sense to her than the mechanics of people. Yet, in Jack's presence, something shifted, something she couldn't quite explain. His raw vulnerability had touched a part of her she thought she had long buried beneath layers of grease and car parts. Their conversation had been brief, but in it, Emma had caught glimpses of a deeper, more complex story. Jack wasn't just any stranger. He was someone who had lived a life of hardship, pain, and quiet struggle. He spoke with a kind of weariness that only comes from facing real battles that had left their marks. And yet there was a certain gentleness to him, an unexpected kindness that didn't match the hardened exterior he wore like armor. It was this dichotomy, the mixture of strength and vulnerability, that intrigued Emma. As they talked, she realized that they weren't so different after all. Jack, in his own way, had built a life of solitude and quiet survival, much like she had. He had learned to rely on himself, to trust only his own hands to fix the broken parts of his world. And in a strange way, that sense of independence resonated with Emma, who had always prided herself on being self-sufficient. But it wasn't just the similarities that drew Emma in. It was the way Jack spoke of the world, the way his words carried the weight of someone who had seen too much. His voice was soft but firm, like a man who had learned to mask his emotions behind carefully chosen words. But every now and then there was a crack in his armor, moments when the facade slipped and Emma could see the person behind the man, the hurt, the loss, the longing. It was almost as if he was searching for something, or maybe someone. They shared their meal in a quiet companionship, the kind that comes from knowing, on some deep level, that neither of them was truly alone. They were both searching, both yearning for something they couldn't quite name. Emma found herself listening more intently than she had in years, absorbing every word, even when they seemed trivial. And when Jack spoke about his past, about the family he had lost, and the dreams that had faded like smoke, Emma could hear the echoes of her own life in his story. She had lost things, too. But unlike Jack, she had learned to bury those losses, to pretend they didn't matter. And yet, as the conversation drew to a close, Emma realized that it wasn't just the pain in Jack's words that had drawn her in. It was the recognition that, in this moment, They were both searching for something they couldn't yet understand. They were connected by more than just circumstance. They were connected by the simple truth that, sometimes, the human experience is nothing more than a series of shared moments that help us understand ourselves a little bit better. As Jack stood to leave, Emma felt a strange sense of loss, as if the moment they had shared had been too brief. She had given him her time, her attention, and in return, he had given her something she hadn't expected, a glimpse into a world outside of her own. When he turned to walk away, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that their paths had crossed for a reason. What began as a simple act of kindness, a shared meal between strangers, had somehow become something more. Something unspoken, something that would stay with her long after the sound of the diner's door had clicked shut behind him. Emma was still mulling over the strange encounter with Jack as she returned to the garage that afternoon. Her tools were waiting for her, the cars lined up, each one with a different set of problems to solve, but she couldn't shake the thought of the man who had come to her table. She hadn't expected to feel so connected to him, especially after such a brief conversation, yet his story lingered in her mind. The way his eyes darkened when he spoke of his past, the hesitation in his voice when he mentioned things he clearly didn't want to revisit it, all painted a picture of a man carrying a weight heavier than any engine repair she'd ever handled. That evening, after locking up the garage, Emma decided to grab a coffee at the same diner. Her mind was restless, as it often was when something unusual occurred in her otherwise predictable life. She hadn't planned on seeing Jack again, yet there he was, sitting at a booth by the window, his gaze lost in the distant lights of the street outside. He hadn't noticed her yet, but she couldn't ignore the feeling that something wasn't finished between them. Her footsteps were quiet as she approached, and as she neared his table, he looked up, his face lighting up with a soft, almost reluctant smile. "You back for more grease and sandwiches?" he asked, his voice warmer than before, as if he had been waiting for this moment. Emma paused, then nodded. "I guess I'm not done with the lunch we started," she said, sitting down across from him without much thought. There was something unspoken between them now, something that had been forged in the quiet space they had shared before. "I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable earlier," Jack began, shifting in his seat. "I know I must have come off strange approaching a stranger in the middle of her lunch, but I didn't really have anyone else to talk to." Emma waved off his apology. "It's fine," she said, her curiosity piqued. "You don't have to explain yourself. But if you want to talk, I'm listening." Jack exhaled deeply, like he'd been holding something in for a long time. He glanced out the window again, as if drawing strength from the night outside before speaking. "I guess it started when I lost my family," he said slowly. "You know, sometimes people talk about losing a loved one, but it's different when you lose everything, when the people you counted on the most just disappear." His words cut through the stillness of the diner, each one landing heavy and deliberate. Emma leaned forward, instinctively drawn into the sadness in his voice. "I lost my wife, my daughter, in a car accident," Jack continued, his eyes still distant. "It was a rainy night. I was driving, and I should have seen the other car coming, but I didn't. I couldn't. And by the time I realized what was happening, it was too late. They were both gone." Emma felt a chill at his words, her heart sinking for him, but she said nothing. There was nothing she could say to make the pain any less. She only sat there, waiting for him to continue, hoping he would. "I went through a lot of anger, guilt. I didn't know who to blame," Jack said, his hands resting on the table, his fingers twitching slightly. "But eventually, you have to start moving forward. At least, that's what people tell you. So I left my old life behind. I didn't want to be that guy anymore, the guy who had it all and lost it all in an instant. So I started over." Emma nodded, a sense of understanding creeping into her chest. She could relate to the pain of loss, although hers was different. Hers was buried under layers of time. But what she didn't expect was the shift in Jack's expression as he looked at her, his eyes growing more intense. "There's more to it," he said softly, almost as if he were confiding in her alone. "I didn't just leave to escape the pain. There's something I've been looking for, something I've been searching for a long time. I've been searching for a woman. I know it sounds crazy, but it's true. She, she saved my life once, and I promised I'd find her." Emma's breath caught in her throat. She had not expected this turn in the conversation. Jack wasn't just a man on the run from his past, was on a mission, a search that seemed almost impossible, but one that was consuming him. "Who is she?" Emma asked before she could stop herself, her voice filled with the curiosity that had been building in her all day. Jack hesitated, his eyes scanning her face for a long moment. Then, with a quiet determination, he spoke the name that seemed to have haunted him for years. "Her name is Emma." The name hit Emma like a wave crashing against the shore, sudden and forceful. She sat there for a moment, stunned, her mind racing to comprehend what Jack had just said. "Emma?" she echoed, her voice barely above a whisper, as though the sound of her own name had lost all meaning. Jack's eyes held hers, unblinking, and the weight of his gaze made Emma's heart beat a little faster. "Yes," he said, his voice low and serious. "It's you. I've been looking for you for years." For a moment, Emma thought she might be hearing things. She blinked, trying to clear the fog that seemed to descend on her mind. This couldn't be real. She wasn't the woman he was searching for. She couldn't be. "What do you mean, looking for me?" she asked, trying to steady her voice, though the tremor in her hands betrayed her. "I don't know you. I've never seen you before today." Jack leaned in slightly, his expression both earnest and troubled. "I know it sounds insane," he admitted. "But it's true. Years ago something happened. A moment, a decision, and I promised I'd find you, but I never knew where to start." Emma was quiet, her mind spinning as she tried to make sense of what Jack was saying. A promise? She had no memory of him, no recollection of any event that could connect them. And yet, there was something in the way he looked at her that suggested he wasn't lying. He believed every word he was saying, and the conviction in his voice only added to the confusion that was quickly overtaking her. "You must have the wrong person," Emma said, shaking her head. "I don't know who you think I am, but I'm just a mechanic. I've never been anyone's savior." Jack's eyes softened, but his gaze never wavered. "You don't remember, do you?" he asked, his voice tinged with sadness. "It was so long ago, but I remember. I remember the woman who helped me, who saved me when I had nothing left. She gave me hope when I thought I had lost it all. And now, I've spent years searching for her." Emma felt a chill run down her spine. She tried to remember, to grasp any flicker of recognition, but nothing came. It was like she was listening to a story that wasn't hers. And yet, something inside her, some forgotten part of her, was stirring, telling her that there was more to this than she could see. Jack's search for her had been going on for years. But why? What had happened in the past that could tie their lives together in such a strange, unexplainable way? The pieces of this puzzle were scattered, elusive, but something told Emma that if she was ever going to understand the truth, she needed to dig deeper. "Why are you here, Jack?" Emma asked, her voice steadying as she sought clarity. "Why come to me now?" Jack paused, and for a long moment, the air between them felt heavy. "Because I believe you're the one I've been searching for, and I think you're the only person who can help me find the answers I need." As the days passed, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper was at play, something she couldn't see yet but that was rapidly pulling her into its orbit. Jack's story had taken a turn that made no sense, and the more she thought about it, the more confused she became. She had never known herself to be anyone's savior, and yet Jack insisted that she was. She didn't remember ever doing anything extraordinary, nothing that could explain why he would search for her across years and miles, just a mechanic in a small town. But the more Jack spoke, the more she realized that his search was tied to something bigger, something that went beyond their chance meeting in the diner. She wasn't just part of his past, she was part of a larger story, one that had yet to reveal itself. It was then that Emma started to notice the subtle clues that hinted at something else altogether. Jack's mention of a promise, his insistence that she was the key to something important, it all began to feel scripted, like a plot she couldn't quite follow. As if someone had written it all down in advance, and they were simply playing their parts without fully understanding the roles they had been cast in. She had never been one to believe in conspiracy theories or hidden agendas, but the more she heard Jack talk about the mysterious woman who had saved him, the more she began to feel like she was somehow part of a bigger plan she hadn't been told about. Jack had mentioned a film, an odd comment, one that Emma had brushed aside at first, but now, in the quiet of her own thoughts, it nagged at her. She was part of a story, but whose story? And why did it feel like she had been waiting for it all along? The more Emma thought about the strange turn her life had taken since meeting Jack, the more she felt like she was living in some kind of twisted narrative, a story she had not written and certainly didn't understand. Jack had spoken of a promise he made, of a search he had dedicated years to, but the way he had mentioned it felt rehearsed, almost too precise, like lines from a script that she hadn't been given. The pieces of his story didn't quite fit, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing something crucial. It wasn't just about a lost family or a man on a mission to find a woman who had unknowingly saved his life. It was something much deeper, much more orchestrated. Emma's nights became filled with questions that gnawed at her, keeping her awake well past midnight. She replayed the conversation with Jack over and over in her mind, piecing together the fragments he had shared with her. There was something almost surreal about the way he spoke, as if his search had been laid out for him long ago, as if he had always known he would find her. She couldn't shake the notion that this wasn't just an ordinary quest, it was a setup, a carefully crafted plan that had drawn her in. The next day, when Emma was knee-deep in oil changes and car repairs, she received an unexpected visit from a woman she'd never seen before. She was tall, dressed in smart, dark clothing that looked expensive, and her eyes were sharp, calculating. There was something about her that immediately set Emma on edge. "Are you Emma?" the woman asked, her voice cool but polite. "I need to speak with you." Emma looked her over with suspicion. "Who wants to know?" The woman didn't flinch. "My name is Rachel. I'm with a film project, and I believe you've been part of a rather important sequence." Emma's heart skipped a beat. This was no coincidence. Rachel's words, her presence, everything about this moment screamed that something bigger was at play. Emma had already started to suspect that Jack's search was tied to something far beyond a simple lost love or a tragic past, but now it seemed like her suspicions were being confirmed. "A film project?" Emma echoed, her voice betraying her confusion. "What does that have to do with me?" Rachel's eyes gleamed with a knowing look, as if she had been waiting for this moment. "Everything?" she said simply, her voice calm but laced with an undertone of urgency. "You're the centerpiece of a story, whether you realize it or not." Before Emma could respond, Rachel handed her a folder. Emma opened it cautiously, her hands trembling slightly as she looked over the documents inside. There were photographs of harem images of her standing in the garage, some candid shots taken when she wasn't aware. There were also sketches, notes, and timelines, all pointing to her, as though she had been the subject of a long drawn-out investigation. And then there were the words at the top of the first page, bold and unmistakable. "Emma, the key to the plan." "What is this?" Emma asked, her voice faltering. "Why are you showing me this?" Rachel leaned forward, her gaze unwavering. "Because you've been part of a script, Emma. A story that's been unfolding for years. Jack isn't just some man who stumbled into your life. He's part of a larger narrative, and you're the one who's been written into it." As the days passed, Emma's world, once steady and predictable, began to unravel at the seams. The strange meeting with Rachel was only the beginning. She tried to make sense of it, but everything she thought she knew about herself, about her life, was now in question. Was she truly the person Jack had been searching for all these years? Was there some kind of grand design behind the events that had led to their meeting? And who was this mysterious director, whose vision seemed to be driving the entire plot? The more Emma thought about the words in that folder, the key to the plan, the more unsettling the whole situation became. It was as if her life had been mapped out long before she even understood the story she was living. Her quiet, solitary existence was nothing more than background noise to a much larger production, and she was only now realizing the role she had been assigned to play. Rachel had been clear about one thing. Jack wasn't the only one involved in this plan. There was a director, someone who had orchestrated everything from behind the scenes. It was all beginning to sound like something out of a film, a dramatic narrative that had been crafted for Emma, whether she liked it or not. Rachel had warned her that the director was watching, always watching, pulling the strings of a story that was unfolding right under Emma's nose. She had tried to brush it off, but the more she looked back at the strange interactions with Jack, the more she realized that nothing had been a coincidence. She had been swept up in a plot she had no control over, and now it was starting to feel like she was the one being manipulated. One evening, Emma decided to pay Jack a visit at the diner. She had no real plan in mind, only the need for answers, to understand what was truly going on. When she walked in, Jack was already seated at the same table where they had met. He looked up as she approached, a look of surprise in his eyes. "I didn't expect to see you here," he said, his voice softer than usual. Emma didn't sit down. Instead, she stood in front of him, her arms crossed. "We need to talk," she said, her voice steady. "I've seen the folder. I know what's going on now." Jack looked taken aback, his eyes widening slightly. "The folder," he repeated, his voice trailing off. "Don't pretend like you didn't know," Emma said sharply. "This whole thing, the search, the meeting, it's all part of some kind of plan, isn't it? You've been searching for me for years, because someone told you to. A director, right? You're not doing this on your own." Jack's face grew pale, and for a moment, Emma could see a flicker of guilt in his eyes. Then, he sighed deeply, as if the weight of his own secrets had become too much to carry. "It's not what you think," he began, his voice quieter than usual. "I didn't know how to explain it, but yes, there's someone behind all of this. Someone who's been pulling the strings. And I was part of it, just like you." Emma's heart sank as the realization hit her with full force. She wasn't just a random woman in Jack's life. She was the central figure in some larger, twisted narrative that had been planned out long before she had even known it. "And now you're telling me?" she asked, her voice breaking slightly. "After everything? After I thought this was just about you and me?" Jack's eyes softened. "I didn't want you to get hurt, Emma. I thought maybe I could stop it before it went too far, but now that you know, I don't know what to do." The next morning, Emma woke up with a sense of unease. The events of the past few days had left her in a fog, but she couldn't ignore the growing feeling that she was part of something much larger than she had ever realized. Jack had confessed that there was a director behind it all, and while she still didn't understand the full extent of the plan, she knew one thing for certain. She had to find out what it all meant. She went to the diner again, but this time she wasn't looking for Jack. She wasn't sure what she was looking for, but something in her told her that the answers lay somewhere within the labyrinth of secrets that had been constructed around her. As she sat down with a cup of coffee, she began to piece together what she had learned so far, trying to find a thread she could follow. It wasn't long before Rachel appeared again, this time sitting across from Emma without any preamble. "You're looking for the truth," she said, her voice low and direct, "and you're not going to like what you find." Emma stared at her, her heart pounding in her chest. "Tell me everything," she demanded. "I need to know." Rachel leaned in slightly, her eyes cold and calculating. "The director is someone who has been watching you for years. The search for Jack, the promise he made, it's all part of a story. But you're not just a part of it. You're the one who holds the key. You just have to figure out how to unlock it." For the first time, Emma felt like she was on the edge of a precipice, and she had no choice but to jump. The search for the truth had begun, and she was no longer just a bystander. She was in the thick of it, whether she liked it or not. The following days felt like a blur, as Emma dug deeper into the mystery that had come to consume her life. She found herself searching for answers in places she never expected: old records, forgotten corners of the town, and even people who seemed to know far more than they let on. The deeper she went, the more she realized how much of her life had been carefully crafted by someone else's hand. Jack's story, Rachel's cryptic warnings, the folder with her name on it, it all pointed to something much bigger. But what? Why had she been chosen? What made her the key to a story that felt like it had been written long before she even had a say? One night, as she was poring over old documents, she stumbled upon something that stopped her cold. It was an old photograph, a snapshot of her, Emma, taken years ago, standing beside someone she didn't recognize. The person was tall, wearing a dark coat, their face obscured by shadows, but something about the image struck her. It wasn't the photo itself, it was the inscription on the back. The one who holds the key. And just like that, the pieces started to fall into place. Emma realized that the truth was far more complicated than she had imagined, and it was up to her to unravel it, no matter where the journey would lead. It was a quiet afternoon when Emma received a call from Jack. The sound of his voice both familiar and unsettling after everything that had unfolded. He hadn't contacted her in days, and she had no idea where he had been, or if he was still part of the plan that seemed to be pulling her deeper into a web of secrets and lies. She had come to realize that everything she knew about her life, about herself, was wrapped in layers of deceit, and Jack was somehow tied to it all. The director, the film, the promise, everything, had been one grand narrative, and Emma, whether she liked it or not, was at the center of it. "Emma," Jack said, his voice strained, "I think I know who the director is. I think I know who's been pulling the strings all along." Emma's heart skipped a beat. "You know?" she asked, her voice trembling with a mix of anticipation and fear. She had long suspected that Jack had been just as much a pawn as she had, but hearing him say it out loud made it feel real. There was no turning back now. "Meet me at the diner," Jack said, his voice urgent. "I'll explain everything. I have to tell you the truth, Emma. You need to know who's been behind all of this." Emma's mind raced as she prepared to meet him. The quiet, everyday world she had once known felt like it was slipping away, and in its place was a terrifying truth she had yet to uncover. As she walked into the diner, she spotted Jack sitting at their usual table, his eyes darting nervously, glancing toward the door as if expecting someone or something. "Emma," he said, standing as she approached, "I'm sorry. I should have told you everything sooner, but I was trying to protect you." Emma sat down, trying to steady her breath. She had no idea what to expect from this conversation, but she knew one thing for sure: everything was about to change. Jack's gaze flickered to the door once more, then back to her. "I've been looking for you because you're not just someone who helped me once. You're someone important to the director. You were never just part of the story. You are the story." Emma's heart thudded in her chest as the implications of his words hit her. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice tight. "It's not just that you were part of the plan. You're the reason this whole thing exists. You're the one who started it all." He paused, taking a deep breath. "The director is someone from your past, someone who has been watching you for years. And it's me. I was sent to find you." Emma's mind reeled, and the world around her seemed to blur. She could hardly breathe as she stared at Jack. He had been part of the plan all along. He was a piece of it, not someone who had stumbled into her life by accident. And the truth hit her like a tidal wave. "You're the director?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Jack shook his head slowly. "No, but I've been part of the puzzle all along. I was sent to bring you back into the story, to make you remember what you've forgotten." And just like that, the truth unfolded in front of her like pages in an old, forgotten book. Emma wasn't just part of a story. She was the story, the reason everything had happened. She had been chosen, crafted into the central character in a plot that had been written long ago. After everything that had happened after the meetings, the revelations, the haunting sense that her life had never been truly her own, Emma found herself standing at a crossroads. The pieces of the puzzle had been scattered, and she had finally put them together. But the truth, as it always does, had a way of changing things. The questions she had about Jack's mission, about her role in this grand narrative, were finally answered. But that didn't make the truth any easier to swallow. She wasn't just a mechanic anymore. She wasn't just Emma, the woman who fixed cars in a small town. She was someone else, now someone who had been crafted into a character by the hands of others. The realization sent waves of disorientation through her. She had spent so long fighting for independence, for control over her life, and now it felt like every step she had taken had been part of someone else's design. But as Jack had told her, this wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning. She had a choice now, a choice that would determine what came next. The plan wasn't finished. The script wasn't done. But Emma was no longer just a pawn. She was the one who could rewrite it. The realization settled in slowly, but steadily. She could choose what came next. She could choose to let this story define her, or she could take control of it. For the first time, Emma didn't feel like she was being pulled along by forces beyond her control. She felt like she was in the driver's seat of her own life. As she walked back to the garage, her hands gripped the wheel of her car with newfound purpose. There was still so much to uncover, so much left to discover about the people who had watched her for so long. But Emma was ready. She was ready to face the next chapter of her life, not as someone controlled by others, but as someone who had the power to take back the narrative. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing: for sure she was the one who would shape it. As Emma stood in front of the diner, the place where it all began, she reflected on everything she had learned over the past few weeks. Her life, which had once been so simple, so quiet, had been turned upside down. Jack's search for her, the mysterious director, the plot that seemed to revolve around her everything, had been more than she could have ever imagined. But now, standing here, Emma realized that it was time to take the final step. The truth had been revealed, but it was only half the battle. Now she had to decide what to do with that truth. The pieces of the puzzle had fallen into place, and Emma could finally see the whole picture. But it wasn't the picture she had thought it would be. It was a new narrative, one she had the power to write. As Jack walked up to her, his face somber but hopeful, Emma looked him in the eye and smiled. It wasn't a smile of relief or of resolution, it was a smile of determination. She had been a part of something bigger than herself, but now she was ready to be the author of her own story. "I know what I need to do now," Emma said, her voice steady, "and I'm not going to let anyone control my story anymore." Jack nodded slowly, understanding the weight of her words. "You've come full circle," he said. "You're no longer just a character in someone else's plot. You're the one who's going to shape the future." And with that, Emma took her first step into the unknown, knowing that the journey ahead would be hers to navigate. The story had come full circle, but it was only the beginning of a new chapter that she would write with her own hands. As she walked away from the diner, the world stretched out before her. It was hers to shape now. She was no longer just part of the script. She was the one in charge of the next page, the next chapter, the next adventure. And for the first time, Emma was truly free.